Hi, you guys. This is part 3 of my talking to my friend Maria Passwaters, and so if you haven't seen the other 2, they're such exciting stories of her life. And she just finished telling a story about when she was 8 years old, and she was so scared, and Jesus actually came into her room. The Father God actually came into her room with. Anyway, go watch it. So right now she's going to continue her life story. Okay, thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Mary. Well, that evening was a turning point of my life. It was one of those moments where I knew if God is with me, then who can be against me or hurt me? And I really believe that my faith in God has really been grounded by what took place that night, that was such a horrific evening that he turned into something so beautiful and so precious. And so as my childhood continued, we finally, as the years went by, we finally were left Frank the seventh
How were
time.
you able to get away?
Well, my oldest brother came, and he started to plan with my mother, and they started to move our belongings out to a storage bin.
Didn't Frank notice?
No, it took about 2-3 months from what I understand. Now, remember, I was always with Frank.
Oh, yeah.
By that stage of my life, I was in 5th grade, and I only went to school like less than half of the year because he took me out of school almost every day. And he would lie to them saying I had a dentist appointment, doctor appointment, whatever. I'm really surprised that they didn't
They really
pick up
failed. You fell
yeah.
through the cracks.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Well, anyways, so that day I was with Frank, and my mother called him and said, I'm leaving you. The police are here, I'm leaving you. And so he got into the car and he looked at me and he said, your mother left you. She left you, and now we're going to go to the attorney, and I'm going to be your legal guardian.
Because you didn't know the plans, because
No,
you were.
they didn't tell me.
Wow.
Right. So at that moment, my heart just sunk, and I was like, no, my mother would never leave me. Even though I never got to see my mother very much as a child, I knew my mother loved me so much, and I knew she would never just abandon me like that. Especially with Frank, knowing how mean he was and how evil he was. And so we get to the house, the police are all there, and he coerced them to not allow us to take her car, which was a brand new Cadillac, but to take the old jalopy, which I don't even know what kind of car it was, but it was falling apart. And he wouldn't. I had a new puppy. He wouldn't let us take the puppy. It was just a whole bunch of things that he convinced the police that he just was very manipulative, and so he was able to always get his way. And so what took place is we finally we left with the old jalopy, we loaded down the car, we took off, and we went on the road. Well, my mother, she only knew all of these companions that she had met all these years. So we went from place to place, and she was just really, just broken.
She was probably in post-traumatic stress disorder too, right?
Yes, definitely.
But all of you were.
We were. So we ended up, unfortunately, that first night that we were away in California, the man she was with convinced her to take me and my brother to see Joys of the Woman, Manuel, which was all about lesbianism, and it was a porn flick. So I just turned 11 years old. It was pretty yeah. I was exposed to a lot as a child, and I had seen porn all as a little girl and saw all kinds of stuff, but that, has really stood out in my head, And so there was a lot that took place, and in the course of those few years, I had been raped, I had been molested. There had been a lot of stuff that had taken place in my life. Well, that just was really difficult. So by the time we got to Montreal, which was where my mother was originally from, I didn't want to live with my mother anymore. Yeah. And I didn't understand as a child, why? Why was all this taking place in my life? Why wasn't my mother able to protect me? Because I didn't know how much she had been hurt, you know? And I was so just a mess that I would just like wet the bed every night. I can remember being outside of my aunt's place and just, releasing myself right there. I mean, I just was a mess. I was an emotional wreck.
I believe it.
I had started my period at 9 years old, so I was already developed by 11. I looked much older than I was. So it just was, didn't know what was going on in my life. So I went and I lived with my grandparents, which was my dad's parents, which was the ones that initially had told him that he would disown, my mother, or him, if he married my mother. So I never had a relationship.
But they loved you.
They were so wonderful, and they're my Italian grandparents. And I had the greatest summer with my grandparents, and it was the beginning of healing. And then my dad just happened to show up because he was visiting them that summer. So I ended up moving to Florida with my dad, and he was remarried to my wonderful stepmother, who is now my adopted mother. And it was interesting in the beginning because she was only, she's 12 years older than me, and she is just absolutely beautiful. So
she is.
I was really intimidated by her.
So is her mom. Both the women in Maria's life are gorgeous.
Yes, my mother is still beautiful.
Both of them.
Yes, they both are still
gorgeous.
Incredibly beautiful. Yes. Well, so it was like really different moving into the house with them, and the environment. They were very laid back. They were, my dad. He wouldn't even think of laying a finger on me because of my childhood with Frank. And I know he felt really, really bad that I ended up going through those years. But when they were divorced, I just hadn't seen my dad in years because he went off. He had his different things going on in his life, so I just hadn't seen him in a long time. So I started to get to know my father. I moved, I was here in Florida.
And didn't you live on a boat?
Well, that was many years later. Yeah. But my mother, she came down and she ended up living in a van with some guy here who was about 20 years old. She was, I don't know how old my mother was at that time, and she became kind of like a hippie. And so sometimes they would take me out, and they actually exposed me to drugs at 11 years old. So that kind of really messed me up. And I had been trying to go to church. I had been going on my own, all by myself. But, once I had that experience, it really, my mother showed up one day at the church, and she just totally just wept at the altar at my little Baptist church. But she came in with a halter top and little, short shorts, and I was embarrassed because I didn't understand, and I was only 11, and I still hadn't forgiven her.
Yeah.
So I stopped going to the church, and I just became a rebel. And after that time, my mother, she moved back to Canada. She started going to church 5 days a week. She started wearing shirts up to here, and it was she got really radical, But me, I went the other direction. And at 11, I started smoking. I started, drinking. I started going out with guys.
Because you looked like you were about 16, so you could buy all the stuff.
Right. And
or
so
18.
And I would just hide everything from my father. He had no idea. I would lie to him. I would just tell him I was at my friend's house, but I'd be out. I started going to bars every night at 13. I started, I was just wild. Wild. Stay out till 5, 6 in the morning partying and going from guy to guy to guy to guy to guy. I was just, everything in the world that could be done, I tried in those years. And I can remember, sometimes I think back at some of the outfits I wore, and they were pretty risque. Just imagine, as risque as you can imagine, that was me. And, but I was really just looking for love. It wasn't because I wanted to just, party and give away my goodies. I wanted to be loved.
Yes.
And I thought that all of that was going to fill that need in my heart. And obviously it can't. It actually, brought more hurt and more just, emptiness. Yeah. I mean, I remember one night I was up in Montreal because my dad kicked me out at 14. I was there and I was so high. I was so out of it. I ended up, 2 guys got me in a room and did things to me together. And I mean, I was just gone. I just did not have any like idea of what life was about.
Yeah, you had never been taught what was right and what was wrong.
Nothing. Yeah, I mean, everything in front of me was always just, out in the open. And so I moved back to Florida at 15. I just got on a Greyhound bus and I said, you know what, I'm going to move back. And my dad, he was still upset with me because I was so wild as a teenager. And I had dropped out of school and everything. I was an honor student. I was very smart, but I just wasted it all. By 14, I dropped out of school. So at 15, I moved back here. My dad had told me, he goes, well, if you want to move in, you're a high school dropout and everything, you have to pay me $250 a month rent. I was like, well, Dad, that's, I'm 15, I don't have a license, I don't have a car, I don't have a GED, I don't have anything.
So how'd you do it?
So I went and moved in with my friend. And I was with my best friend, and we just stayed together, we lived together, and we had the party house. Her mother was never home, so people just came in and out of that house, drugs, sex, and rock and roll, and it was just continuous. And I worked full time, I rode a moped to work, I worked night shift, I just did what, I made a living and everything. And then one night we were hitchhiking, and this guy picked us up, and he offered us cocaine, and so her and I started doing cocaine with these guys, and he was a drug dealer. And for 1 month, I just started doing coke every single day. And at that moment, I realized, it was right before I turned 16, and I said, you know what? I would walk into that house, and back then, they didn't have 24-hour TV. Do you remember the days where it was the colored screen or the pshh? Yeah. And I'm looking at everybody, and they're all just on the couch like this, and I'm like going, I don't want this for my life. And so I went to my dad, I looked him in the eyes, and I sat and I had my first heart-to-heart with my father. And I said, Dad, I don't want to live in a house with druggies. I don't want to do cocaine. And cocaine is evil. Every time I do cocaine, it takes over me, and I feel like a different person. I mean, it was like the most demonic drug I've ever done in my life, because it made me sleep with my boyfriend just for the drugs, and I felt like a prostitute.
Wow.
And so it was just the worst stage of my life, and I said, if I don't stop this now, I'm going down a road that I'll never be able to return. And so my dad and I wept together, and we hugged together, and we had the most beautiful time together, and we had our first heart-to-heart connection with one another. And he let me move back in, and I lived there for a short time, and I got my, my GED, I got my driver's license, and then my adopted mom gave me her car. It was my first beautiful blue Dodge Charger. It was old, but it was beautiful.
Just in case she watches, hi Sherry, we love you too.
Yes, I love you. And I love you too, Mom.
I already said hi
Dad.
to Eileen, and
all of you.
In case Nino, hi
Yes.
Nino, and Nino, her dad, looks like Sean Connery.
Yes.
I mean,
super handsome.
Very.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so finally, I ended up meeting this guy, and I lived with him for 2.5 years. And I thought, oh, this is the one. This is who I'm gonna marry. And I thought, this is my everything. This is my Prince Charming. And then I got pregnant, and I lost the baby. And when I lost the baby, I was 18. I was 6 weeks pregnant. I miscarried. And he had wanted me to have an abortion, and I was like, no way, I'm never having an abortion. And when I saw that he really didn't want to marry me, it was like I was heartbroken. And so months went by, I started gaining a lot of weight, I was really depressed. We were still together, but we weren't doing well. And my brother was in Bible school, in Youth with a Mission. And one of my dad's friends would always invite me to church, where I met you guys, Lighthouse. And so it was like, God, it was constantly just knocking on my heart and wooing me, beckoning me, calling me, saying, my daughter, come back to me. And I knew it every single day. I could feel the pull in my heart.
Sorry, Jose told me we've got to cut it
Yes.
off right now.
Okay.
So we're going to go into part 4.
Okay.
Okay, bye guys.